gonna put the slides on Ruler later on, so that should be fine. So, what this is about improving your own debating. I think the important thing is that, like, a lot of people, in fact a lot more people from other universities ask me what they can do to get better at debating. And I realized I didn't really have a good answer to that. My answer was kind of like, you should just debate more, or you should read more, but I think that is too vague and not all that instructive. So having put in some thought, I came up with a set of things that you can do to improve on, and a set of things that you can look to try and improve. So I'm going to first look at some things you can work on, and so you can think of those when debating in order to try and improve things you might focus on. Then I've got some general advice, then how you can improve debating on your own without any other debaters, then what you can do in practice debates, and finally what you can do in competitive tournaments. So as far as things to work on, the first thing is, like, you just need to know the general rules of debating. So that's the rules of what each speaker needs to do, how judging is supposed to work. I think a lot of people don't actually do this. Like, the average debater has never read the rules of VP debating, and I think that's a problem. It's worth actually going and finding out what is expected of people before tournaments and how things are meant to work. But that's kind of very basic. The second thing you can look at is improving your style. So style broadly refers to the way in which you speak. So there's a basic set of things, like whether you have odd verbal tics. A lot of debaters say the word right a lot. That's something that I do. You might say you might say these are the sort of things that people can easily notice and are relatively easy to fix. What you might want to do is just ask someone in a practice debate that if you make that sort of word they clap, that's really irritating, and it means you're likely to fix the verbal tic fast. The second thing is what sort of rhetoric you use. So a lot of people don't debate in a way that tries to be stylistically persuasive. So I think an important thing is to consider actively the type of language you use, whether it makes people more likely to believe you or not. The third thing is just general improvement of argumentation and rebuttal. So that's a set of different things. The first is your theoretical knowledge, which is things like what are different ways people understand rights, what is the standard liberal understanding of when we limit freedom. Those are the sort of theoretical pieces of knowledge that add to your debating skill. Then there's general knowledge. So how many facts about the world do you know? Do you know what's going on at any given time? There's examples and case studies. So do you know the prominent examples where liberalization worked? Do you know the prominent examples where liberalization failed? These are the sorts of things you can easily improve your competence at. And also being able to recognize a common set of arguments. So most debaters rely on fairly standard arguments. If you know those arguments better than them, you can improve your debating very quickly. Then also you can improve how you prioritize arguments. You can improve how you give and take points of information. You can improve time management. There's also note-taking is something that's often neglected. So very few people actively think about the way they take notes, both as a judge and as a speaker. And people don't try different styles of note-taking, which I think is an area where someone could get quite a lot better in debating. I've certainly seen this with people I coach, that sometimes they're really bad just because their notes are incomprehensible. You can also work on having more concise notes. Then a very important part of debating, I think, is teamwork. So debating is not an individual game. You could be a very smart, very capable individual speaker, but if you're just not good to work with, you're going to be a bad debater. I think that's something that people don't really consider, but trying to improve your behavior on a team is a very important way to get better. So if, for example, you're not supportive of your speaking partners, you might notice a trend where people speaking with you do worse than when they speak with other people. You might struggle to communicate to somebody else in prep. These are all important things that are worth considering. The other thing is just prep itself. Can you come up with arguments quickly? Can you pick up central issues in debates quickly? Can you write down things in prep in a way that allows you to remember them and allows you to give a speech? The next thing is something that people don't commonly talk about. So in any sort of activity or game, there's the game itself, which consists of the rules of that game. So in rock, paper, scissors, for example, you know that the rules of rock, paper, scissors are that rock beats scissors and loses to paper, right? A second component is called the meta game. This is borrowing from computer games, but I think is very important for debating. And what the meta game is it's just the way in which people go about playing that game. So in debating, we're trying to be persuasive, and there's a set of arguments that people find popular. There's ways of making arguments that people find persuasive. A good way to understand this is most debaters are liberals, so if your rhetoric is not liberal rhetoric, you're not going to do well in debating unless you work very hard to develop a conservative rhetoric. That's playing the metagame of debating. It's understanding what other people do find persuasive and playing on that. I think the right way to understand debating is to understand it as a game that you're playing in which you should do whatever it takes to win that game. And what that means is to be persuasive to other people and not just to be persuasive to yourself. There's also a component of this, which is that if other people are running certain arguments a lot and you notice a trend, then it's worthwhile investing your training into figuring out how to do better than that trend. So if everyone's running libertarian arguments where they don't think the government should ever take away people's freedom, you learn to run a paternalist argument for why the government should protect people from themselves. Often other people just don't know how to deal with that, and you do really well. I think that's an important thing that's worth investing in and considering. Okay. If there are any questions, you should put up your hand and ask them, right? The next, and I'm going to be rushing because of things starting late, so some general advice for improving your debating. I think, so a lot of people, once they learn the basics, they kind of need coaches to get better. And a lot of people, when they get to university and don't have coaches, they stagnate and never improve. So the one thing is, if you really want to get better at debating, you should have clear, measurable, short-term goals. I think that's probably the most important thing is, let's say you've noticed your style isn't great and you stumble on words, for example. Set for the next month that your goal in debating is to fix that problem. If you want, for example, to learn to deal with a particular argument or learn to run a particular argument, you should have that as a goal and try to work on it when you can. The important thing is, don't try to fix too much at once. So debating's quite a complex game. There's a lot of variables moving around at once. And when you get oral adjudications, for example, you're often told a long list of everything that you could possibly change in that speech. I think it's just a waste of time to try to remember all of that at once. What makes sense is to have particular things that you're working on. Try to make sure you get feedback that's useful to those particular things, and once you've improved them, move on to other things, right? In general, things will go into decline as you stop working on them, but once you build habits in debating, that's the best way to make sure you get better and to stay better. The other thing is, don't always think you've won debates. So I think, like, the biggest problem often is people go into debating. I mean, looking at the people here, it probably doesn't apply to most, if any of you, but a lot of people are pretty arrogant. They like to get their own opinion out there. They go into debating and they think they've always won. So the way to approach adjudication is that if you lost a debate, there was always something you could have done better. Debating's a game of persuasion. If you didn't persuade the judges, then you lost, and you should be better. I think that's the right sort of mindset. So blaming other people, if you're a judge, blaming the speakers, saying like, well, they're just too bad to understand my feedback, for example, is something a lot of judges do. You're never going to improve if you take that sort of attitude, where you're willing to say the reason I did badly is because of other people and not because of myself. I think err on the side of caution, right? So maybe other people are unreasonable in some cases, but it's better to blame yourself than to blame others if you want to improve as a debater. The other thing is that you should try to diversify. So this is some advice that I think people don't commonly heed, especially in South Africa. And my personal view is that the best debater would be the best thinker, would be the best judge, and would be the best speaker. Improving skills in one of those is the same as improving skills in the others. I think particularly speakers should try judging. So judging is a lot harder than speaking, in my opinion. You need to concentrate on a lot more. The skill in persuading speakers of the reasons why they placed where they did in a debate are often more difficult. I think the reasons people don't think this about judging is that they don't see it as competitively as speaking. But I think the skills you learn in judging and the ability to actually persuade people is very useful for your speaking. Equally, I think it's important to improve your judging that you speak. Learning kind of what it feels to be in a debate. In particular, if you want to try and be on a team of judges setting motions and things like that, it's better to have spoken so you understand what's reasonable to expect someone to come up with in prep. So diversification, very important. I think also try speak in different roles. That doesn't mean switch role in every debate, right? So I think that would be counterintuitive. But one thing worth doing is maybe spend a semester where you try to only speak first, and then spend another semester where you try to only speak second. I think that improves your teamwork because it helps you understand what should be expected of your teammates. But it also gives you an appreciation of what you need to do in your particular role. But also, you can often get away with not having the best rebuttal maybe in a leader of ops speech, but you definitely can't get away with having bad rebuttal in an opposition whip speech. And I think, like, when you're forced to do well at different things, it improves that aspect of your debating for other speeches, and that's pretty cool. So this is like a lot of stuff. I mean, I think the slides are going to be up on Vula, you can look at them, but as long as you get a few ideas from that, then I think this talk has been vaguely useful. The other thing is that debating role models is an important way to improve. So you'll see some debaters that you think are good, or that do certain things that you like, and it's worth focusing on what those debaters are doing to try and improve the way you speak. I mean, you can often identify debaters who come from similar circumstances, who have similar natural abilities, but who have more experience. They debate in a way that's similar to you, but they execute it much better. I think if you can identify those sort of speakers and try to copy what they do, that's a good way to learn it first, right? Later on it becomes less useful because you obviously want to beat everyone at some stage, but in the early stages it's important to try and learn from other people, and if you focus on particular people it's usually more effective. Then my most important piece of advice, which goes for things other than debating, I think a lot of what this talk is based on is conventional wisdom in coaching sport, which a lot of people when they're playing sport follow, but when they're debating don't for some reason. And that's that you need to get worse in order to get better. So that sounds paradoxical, right? But what that means is that sometimes there are things that are going to be better for your debating in the long run, but you're going to have to get worse in the short run in order to execute them. So a good example of this is note-taking. If you write your whole speech out, that's usually the most effective way to give a speech when you just start debating. That's generally true, right? But it's not the best long-run note-taking strategy. It wastes your time, it's harder for you to find things on your page. So what you need to work towards is having headings on a page. But in order to get to that, you're going to have to go through a period where you're worse. And a lot of people just aren't willing to do that. So they notice, they go from one debate to the next, they try something new, they get worse, and they think, well, this clearly didn't work, and so they abandon it. It takes some discipline to know what will work in the long run, and that's an important thing for improvement. I think many people, in particular people coming out of schools debating, get to university, they don't want to change away from what they did at school because they feel like they're getting worse, and that means they stagnate. So be willing to be flexible and be willing to get worse in order to improve. Okay, any questions about that sort of stuff? I think maybe I've been vague. I haven't used enough examples yet. I'm going to do that later. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what you can do to get better on your own when you're not actually debating. And I think a lot of debating improvement is useful for general academic improvement as well. Certainly the things you can do to get better at debating on your own are usually helpful for life in general, but also for your studies. So the first thing is that you should read as much as you can, but that's vague, right? It's the sort of boring advice everyone gives. What's important is how you go about reading if you want to get better at debating. So a lot of people read an article and they'll absorb what that article says, but they're not actively thinking about what they can take from that article to use in a debate. So you might read, for example, you're reading like Plato's Republic because you're in first year, or rather the Apology, and you're discussing whether we have duties to the state to accept the laws of the state that we consent to. You may want to consider how that might be used in a debate. A good example is to consider how you might use Socrates' reasons for volunteering to die as reasons why the death penalty might be permissible. That sort of way of thinking, and it's quite broad, so you do a whole lot of things in a variety of courses. You might read a bit of news. Just think about what debates that might be useful to, and think about how you could use that in a debate, and then ideally try it out when you get the opportunity. So maybe you're not sure if it's going to work, right? But in practice debates, if you're not sure if something's going to work, rather try it and lose because you'll get better than avoid it because you don't think it'll be the best thing to run. So read actively and read conscientiously. I mean, this isn't a huge investment, right? So you're doing a course, you spend an extra 5 minutes thinking about how it could be useful for debating. That's a very small time investment, but it has quite a large payoff. The other thing is that you should have conversations with people about issues and arguments, but in particular you should talk to people who know a lot about certain things. So, like, we're all at university, we all know, well, we're not all at university, but we all know people who know a hell of a lot about certain issues, and if you talk to them about things they're interested in, you might be able to use that in debates. Probably like 80% of the things I say in debates come from things I've heard other people tell me, as opposed to things I've read, and I think thinking in conversation about whether you might use something in a debate later is an important way you can improve outside of the debating context. The third thing is that it's worth following a website called Debate Motion Central and looking at which motions are being run. So that's helpful because if you ever go to a tournament, chances are they're getting inspired by this website, and so you can do quite a bit better just by following it. The other thing is that if you familiarize yourself with popular motions or motions that come up often, usually the arguments you use in those debates are similar to ones you use in other debates. And so thinking about those motions is important, but a second thing you could do is you could actually do prep on your own, right? I mean, a university's debating prep takes 15 minutes. That's not very long. I don't think there's any reason, if you really want to get better at debating, that you can't prep one motion a day on either side. That's like half an hour. That's not a huge time investment, but if you're consistently prepping debates, consistently thinking about arguments, it'll do a lot to help you improve. If you're willing to be more actively invested, you could prep debates or research issues specifically for debating. And this is where, if you're looking at the motions that people are running often, you then go and research that, you can probably come up with much better arguments than the average debater can. If you're interested, for example, in the debate about nationalizing the mines, read what some economists think about it. I guarantee you that like 90% of economists will have better arguments than almost 100% of debaters will. And if you can absorb those arguments and run them in a debate, you'll probably do very well. So the other thing is that you could give an actual speech. So this is like if you really try hard. So I've tried to order these so that it goes from easy things to do to things that are like more try hard and difficult to do. But if you just give a speech to a mirror or whatever, that's often quite a good thing. It's how you can practice making arguments given the time limit. You can practice note-taking. It also doesn't actually require that much time. It requires like half an hour to prep and give a speech at most. And if you do that on both sides of a particular motion, where maybe you wait a bit of time and then you try to respond to the speech you just gave, that's often quite a good way to get better. It's pretty much 80% of what I did when I first started debating, and I think it saw pretty good results. And since I've stopped doing that, I think I've probably improved a lot less. The final thing that you can do is to watch debates. So this is the biggest investment. It takes like an hour to watch a debate. The other thing is that when you watch a debate, there's certain ways to improve from watching debates. So just watching the debate and being like a passive listener, someone you like might watch a movie in the cinema, you're not going to get that much better. But if you think about the arguments they ran in that debate, could you use them in a different context? Maybe you try running the same argument, try emulating a particular thing from the debate, try thinking about what's wrong with it. So a good thing to do is, if you watch a high level or medium level debate, like a national championship or even world championships, then you think, well, what's wrong with this speech? What could have been better? What could I have said in response to it? That sort of thing is a good way, I think, to improve, especially if you're looking to go from being what one might call an intermediate level debater to being a really strong debater. Okay, cool. Those are some things you could do on your own. Any questions about that? Any other ideas? Yeah?
So, pretty much only works for like the first position or the stats for those, because those are just like give the response.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool, yeah. So you can, if you practice giving speeches, you can do it in the context of watching a bit of a debate first. That's often quite useful, especially if you're planning to speak against particular people, and you then watch them speak and prep to beat them. That's like learning the meta game of debating, right? If you go to Worlds and you want to do well, that's something you should do. Yeah?
Something I also find helpful, I've done a few times, is to watch the PM give the LO speech and then compare yourself to the LO speech you then watch.
Yeah.
So see the differences between you and the exact same speech in that debate.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's usually quite cool, right? Because then you get a sense of what some different approaches might be to the same motion. And then you can also, if you want to go a bit further than that, try to identify maybe what sort of things were you not thinking of in prep that the other person clearly was thinking of. And that helps work on your prep as well. Cool. I mean, I think a lot of this is useful for judging as well. So in judging, you're meant to be a reasonable, informed citizen. Certainly watching debates and trying to see how you would judge the debate relative to someone else is an important thing to do. But just knowing more about the world helps you be a good judge, I think, as well. And you can also, through practicing speaking, improve your oral adjudication, which is also quite important. Okay, so then practice debates. So I consider internal league to be the setting of practice debates. There's going to be some practice debates on the weekend. That should be quite fun, which I will organize. And so here's some general tips about that. So the first thing is to just have things you want to improve in a practice debate, have things you want to make sure you do well. If you're just kind of debating generally, I think often you don't really improve. Or if you do, you don't target the right things, you don't target the things you most need to improve on. Usually you'll get better at the stuff you're already good at, and stay bad at the stuff you're already bad at with that approach. So, the other thing that I've said already is don't worry about losing in practice. So some things you're going to try out, you may try out new arguments. That's an important way of improving. It might mean you lose debates. Not everything works. That shouldn't dishearten you. Sometimes you lost, but you benefited from losing. I think it's often easier to improve from losing than from winning as well. So usually there's some clear reason why you lost the debate. If you can identify what that is, and if you notice a pattern, then that'll often help you pick out what you need to work on the most. The other thing that's important is you should try your best in practice debates. So obviously try different things, but that doesn't mean do crazy things or not care about the debate. I think you can debate for fun. I would highly recommend that. But if you want to get better, then when you're doing practice debates, try to take them seriously. And I think this is a thing a lot of people struggle with in training. So you train against people you know, you're just having fun in the debates, and then it doesn't end up being that beneficial. The way you end up speaking in the tournament's really different. Then what's really the point? So try to do your best. That's pretty self-evident. I think the other thing in practice debates, if you have a judge, is the way you handle feedback is very important. So the first thing is that you need to interpret feedback as a speaker, or if you're a judge getting feedback on how you adjudicated. I think trying to take feedback too literally is often not the best idea. You want to try and be charitable and recognize that often other people have different ways of expressing things to you. So a judge might say they didn't like an argument. Often there's things you could have changed about that argument, and to some extent you need to read into what that judge is telling you in order to pick out the best areas where you can improve. I think the other thing is that you want to ask judges questions. So if you are working on a particular thing, let's say you're working on your style, you wanted to remove a verbal tick. Ask the judge, did you notice me doing this in the debate? If they say no, you've probably been working on that well. If they say yes, you said it like 1,000,000 times, then you probably need to keep working on it, right? If you ran an argument to test it out, and the judge didn't talk about it in the oral adjudication or in personal feedback, ask about the argument. Did they believe it? Did you use the right examples? Was it made persuasively? Was it made to be important in the debate? That's the sort of thing that can help quite a lot, because often adjudicators will tell you what they thought was important, but you have specific things that you're trying to change about your speaking, so ask them. The other thing is it's worth talking to panelists like this, something people don't do a lot. But you need to convince a group of judges, not just one judge, and so talking to more than one's important, even in practice. And I think if you trust your partner enough, you can talk to different people and then share the feedback you got at the end, and get feedback from a judge on what your speaking partner is doing. The other thing is that it's also worth trying to emulate what other debaters do. So this is one of the biggest ways that practicing helps. If you just copy what other debaters are doing, if they do something good, you can usually get a hell of a lot better. And I think, yeah, there's a lot of examples of debaters who start out like they don't know very much, but they speak against good people who know a hell of a lot, and they just pretty much copy everything that those people have been saying that's intelligent and use it in other debates and can do very well at that. So that's worthwhile as well. I think, okay, any questions about practice debates or any comments about them? And try speaking with different people, so you can learn a lot from your partner, and if you keep having the same partner all the time, chances are you're going to learn less, right? Because not everything that's said in prep gets said in an actual debate, so you're missing out if you don't have a prep with different people. Cool. Okay, the last thing is about competitive tournaments, and this is kind of more intermediate to advanced stuff. So a lot of this is just about how you can adapt within tournaments, because I think a lot of debaters go into tournaments, they've got an idea of what they should be doing, that doesn't work, and then they just fail and lose, right? That happens a lot, and it doesn't only happen in debating. So the first thing is that you should always communicate with your partner. This goes for practice debates too. So it's worth chatting after the debate, but also after you've received feedback, so that you consult on what sort of changes you want to make. Because if you change something about your speaking, that may not work with what your partner's trying to do. You end up both changing differently. Your teamwork diminishes. You do even worse the next time. Right? So communicating with your partner is very important. The second thing is you should be willing to adapt what you're doing in a tournament to the way that people are speaking, to the way that people are judging that tournament. The worry here is that you over-adapt, right? So what you need to recognize is that being a good debater doesn't mean winning every time. It means doing things that would win a high percentage of the time. So you might have done the right thing in a debate, and that meant you had like an 80% chance of winning, but that particular judge was one of the 20%, and so you didn't win. That's something that happens in tournaments. You need to be disciplined enough and self-aware enough to know that something would generally have worked but didn't work in this particular instance. And obviously once you have enough evidence, you then make radical changes. Learning an appropriate way to adapt is often the difference between people who perform very well in tournaments and people who might break first but then end up losing in quarterfinals or something. Right? It's about doing good science. Then The other thing that's important is that you should use early rounds or non-critical rounds to experiment. So often there's a lot of things you might want to do, or like some argument you might want to run that's maybe a bit risky. It helps to test those things out early when it doesn't matter as to whether you're going to go through to the next round or not. And I think a lot of people aren't trying to do this in tournaments. They're not trying to ease into them, they're not trying to understand the tournament itself and use debates to understand the tournament. I think that's an important tool that's worth using. The final thing is about responding to feedback, and this affects some people in practice debates as well. And this is that if you don't like the result or you're really angry about it, there's no point getting feedback. It's counterintuitive. So if you go and you're going to argue with a judge, you're not going to benefit. They're not going to like you. It's going to be unpleasant. Take time to calm down and then go get feedback later when you think you can do it in a constructive way. If you don't feel like you can constructively receive feedback, then it's just not worth it. It might upset you more, and that might affect your mindset for the next debate. It's just better not to get feedback then. And potentially your partner has a different mindset, in which case let them go get feedback and you take the time to relax and be in a position where you can receive that feedback well. The final thing about competitive debates is that if things go badly, catching up is usually possible, right? But also, I don't think you should ever give up, right? So if you go to your first tournament, you might do badly. That's something that happens. In my first tournament, I won like one debate. But it's important not to give up and stop trying to do your best, because the only way you can really learn is by judging what happens when you speak at your best. And so if you choose not to do that because you're not doing well in the early rounds, then you're not going to benefit from tournaments. It's also just unpleasant to the other debaters. So those are some things that I think are worth thinking about. But the most important thing, because I reckon all of this is pretty much just common sense, the most important thing is that when you are debating, approach debating like you might in any other sport. So if you're learning to play rugby, for example, most people practice running and changing direction, they practice kicking, they work on small things separately, they don't just play games all the time, right? And I think debating is something that shouldn't be different to that, but unfortunately is. The other thing is when you are competing, just bear in mind that you want to try and change things, you want to be invested in your own debating. A lot of the time when you're at school, a coach is being invested in your debating for you and they're telling you what to fix. But at university, you've got to do this stuff for yourself. And unless you're doing this stuff for yourself and unless you're self-aware as a speaker, you're not going to get a hell of a lot better. Cool. I've also got a long reading list of stuff that's useful, and I've explained its usefulness, but that's going to be on Vula. So you can look at these sort of things. I'm going to put more resources progressively on Vula. So if you do want to get better at debating, you can just find stuff to read there. But otherwise, like, there's a lot of things out there, and maybe other debaters don't read it, but it can be useful to you, and you can come up with stuff that they won't know. So just think about everything and whether it might be useful. Cool, that's the end of this training session. Sorry about the lecture-y format. The next ones are going to be more interactive, but I think this is like a good basic starting point to help people get better when I start to talk about the other things, because obviously I can't concentrate on everyone's speaking individually. You're going to have to concentrate on that on your own. Cool, thanks guys.